Sometimes grief doesn't arrive with tears. Sometimes it arrives with a smile. And the moment I saw my sister smiling at our father's funeral, something inside my chest went cold. My name is Michael Carter. I'm 38 years old. And before I tell you what happened that day, I want to ask you something. Where are you listening from today? Because stories like this travel farther than we expect. Into living rooms, kitchens, long drives, and quiet nights where people sit alone with memories they're not sure how to carry. Now let me take you back to the day we buried my father. It was a gray morning, the kind where the sky looks heavy, like it's holding back rain that might never fall. The funeral home smelled like lilies and polished wood. People whispered softly as they filed into the chapel, hugging each other in that awkward way people do when they don't know what to say about death. My father had passed suddenly 2 days earlier. A heart attack. No warning, no long illness, just gone. And for most of us, the shock still hadn't settled. My Aunt Margaret sat in the front row dabbing her eyes with a handkerchief. My cousin? Ryan stared at the floor. Even my mother looked like someone had taken the air out of her lungs. But then there was my sister, Claire. Claire stood beside the casket in a simple black dress, her dark hair pulled neatly behind her shoulders, and she was smiling, not broadly, not obviously, just a faint curve of her lips. A calm, quiet smile. The kind of smile you might wear if you just heard good news. At first I thought I was imagining it. Grief can distort things. It can make normal expressions look strange. But then she did it again. As the priest began speaking, Claire lowered her head respectfully, and that smile appeared once more. A chill crept up my spine. Because Claire and Dad had always been close. Closer than the rest of us. She was the one who called him every Sunday. The one who helped him with paperwork when Mom struggled with it. The one who visited him every week after he retired. If anyone should have been crying that day, it was her. Instead, she looked almost peaceful. When the priest finished his final prayer, people began lining up to say their goodbyes. One by one, they approached the casket. Some cried. Some touched Dad's hand. Some whispered quiet words only he would hear. When it was Claire's turn, the room seemed to grow unusually quiet. She stepped forward slowly. She leaned over the casket, and she whispered something into Dad's ear. I couldn't hear the words, but I saw her expression clearly. And when she stepped back, that same small smile returned. This time it lingered. My stomach twisted. Later that afternoon, our family gathered at my parents' house. It was the house we grew up in. The same kitchen where Dad used to make pancakes on Sunday mornings. The same living room where we opened Christmas presents every year. But that day, the house felt different. Heavy. Like every wall was holding its breath. Relatives filled the rooms with quiet conversation. Coffee cups clinked softly against saucers. Someone turned on the television for background noise but kept the volume low, and through all of it, Claire stayed quiet, watching, observing, almost like she was waiting for something. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I found her standing alone near the back porch looking out into the yard. The wind moved gently through the trees. Claire, I said. She turned slowly, and there it was again. That smile. Not joyful, but certain. You okay? She asked. The question caught me off guard. I should be asking you that, I said. She tilted her head slightly. Why? I hesitated before speaking, because part of me felt ridiculous, but another part of me couldn't ignore the feeling growing in my chest. You were smiling today, I said quietly. Her expression didn't change. At the funeral. For a moment, she said nothing. She simply studied my face. Then she exhaled softly. Michael, she said, you always did notice things other people miss. A strange knot formed in my stomach. So you admit it? I asked. You were smiling. She turned back toward the yard. The sun had begun to dip behind the trees, casting long shadows across the grass. Then she said something that made my skin go cold. I wasn't smiling. Because Dad died. I frowned. Then why were you smiling? She turned toward me again, and this time the look in her eyes was different. Not sad, not guilty, certain. Because, she said quietly, Dad finally stopped lying. My heart skipped. What are you talking about? Claire glanced toward the living room where our relatives were gathered. Then she leaned closer to me. Tell me something, she said. When was the last time you looked at Dad's safe? My mind stumbled over the question. His safe? Yes. The one in his office. I shook my head slowly. I didn't even know he had a safe. Claire let out a soft breath, and that small smile appeared again. That's what I thought. The knot in my stomach tightened. What's in it? For a moment, she didn't answer. Instead, she walked toward the hallway that led to Dad's study. She stopped at the door. Then she looked back at me. Michael, she said quietly, there's something in there that's about to change everything you think you know about our family. My pulse began to pound. What kind of something? Claire placed her hand on the doorknob, and then she said 5 words I will never forget. Dad wasn't the man you thought. The door creaked open slowly, and in that moment, I realized the reason my sister had been smiling at our father's funeral. Because whatever was inside that room, it meant our father's secrets had just died with him, and Claire had known about them all along. The moment I realized my sister knew something was the moment my grief turned into suspicion. Up until then, I had been drowning in memories. Dad lowering me onto his shoulders when I was a kid. Dad teaching me how to fix the chain on my bike. Dad staying up late helping me study for exams. He was the kind of man who fixed things. Broken fences, leaky pipes, even broken hearts. But there was one thing he never managed to fix. Our family. And that started with my sister. Her name is Caroline, 2 years older than me. And if you had met her at the funeral, you would have thought she was the perfect daughter. She hugged relatives. She thanked people for coming. She even cried at the right moments. But every so often, that smile returned. Not wide, not obvious, just a quiet little curl at the edge of her mouth, like someone watching a magic trick they already knew the ending to. At first, I told myself I was imagining things. Grief does strange things to your mind. But then something happened, and it changed everything. The funeral service ended around noon. People started leaving in small groups, whispering their condolences as they passed. Mom had already gone home. She couldn't handle the cemetery. So it was just Caroline and me standing by Dad's grave while the workers prepared to lower the coffin. The air smelled like fresh dirt and flowers, and silence settled over us. For a moment, I thought we might actually share the grief together. But Caroline broke the silence first, and what she said made my stomach drop. She leaned closer to me and whispered, "Did Dad ever tell you about the safety deposit box?" I blinked. What? She straightened up again, watching the workers lower the casket. The bank, she said casually. He had one. I stared at her. No, he didn't. Her smile returned. That same quiet smile. Oh, she said softly. Yes, he did. Then she turned and started walking toward the cars, leaving me standing there, confused, and suddenly very uneasy. That night I couldn't sleep. My mind kept replaying that moment, the smile, the whisper, the strange certainty in her voice. Dad had never mentioned a safety deposit box. Not once. And we were close. Closer than Caroline had been with him in years. In fact, they barely spoke the last few years. Which made it even stranger. So the next morning, I drove to the bank, mostly to prove her wrong. But when I walked up to the counter and asked about my father's name, the teller checked the computer, then looked up. Yes, she said. He did have a safety deposit box here. My stomach tightened. Did? She nodded. It was closed yesterday afternoon. Yesterday. The day of the funeral. My chest went cold. Closed by who? The teller hesitated, then said the name I already knew. Caroline Mitchell. I drove straight to her house, my heart pounding the entire way. Something felt wrong, very wrong. Caroline wasn't just smiling at the funeral. She had been planning something. When she opened the door, she didn't even look surprised to see me, just amused. "You went to the bank," she said. Not a question, a statement. I stared at her. "What was in the box?" She shrugged. "Important. Things." "Like what?" She studied me for a moment, then stepped aside. "Come in." I hesitated, but curiosity pulled me forward. Her living room looked normal. Too normal. Like nothing in the world had changed. But then she walked to the kitchen table and slid an envelope toward me. "Read it." My hands felt strangely heavy as I picked it up. Inside was a folded letter. Dad's handwriting. I recognized it instantly. The moment I started reading, my heart began to race. Because this wasn't just a letter. It was a confession. And by the time I reached the last sentence, I understood exactly why my sister had smiled at Dad's funeral and why she had been waiting for this moment for years. Dad had been hiding something terrible. Something that explained the silence between him and Caroline, the fights, the distance, the cold tension that had slowly poisoned our family. The letter was dated 3 years ago, and in it, Dad admitted the truth, not to the world. Not to the police, but to Caroline. He wrote that when she was 19, she had caught him doing something illegal. At first, I didn't understand. Then the next paragraph made my blood run cold. Dad had been stealing money, not from strangers. From his own company. Small amounts at first, then larger ones. And when Caroline discovered it, she threatened to report him. But instead, they made a deal. A secret deal. One that had lasted 3 years, and ended the day Dad died. I slowly lowered the letter, my hands shaking. "Tell me this isn't real," I said quietly. Caroline leaned back in her chair, and for the first time, she didn't smile. Instead, her eyes looked tired, older than I had ever seen them. "It's real," she said. I swallowed. "So what was in the safety deposit box?" This time, the smile returned. But now I finally understood it. It wasn't happiness, it was victory. And then she said something that made the entire story darker than I ever imagined. Everything he owed me. She opened a second envelope and slid it across the table. Inside were documents, bank transfers, property papers, account numbers, millions of dollars. My father hadn't just been stealing, he had been hiding the money for years. And Caroline had known exactly where it was. I looked up slowly. "You blackmailed him." She didn't deny it. "I gave him a choice," she said calmly. "Prison or payment." My chest tightened. He was our father. Her eyes suddenly hardened. And he was a criminal. Silence filled the room. Heavy, uncomfortable. I didn't know what to feel. Anger, shock, disgust, or something worse, understanding. Because suddenly, all the pieces made sense. The distance, the tension, the smile at the funeral. Dad hadn't just died. He had been paying for his sins until the very end, and Caroline had collected the final payment. But the story didn't end there. Because, a week later, something happened that Caroline never saw coming. And when it did, that quiet smile finally disappeared from her face. A week passed after that conversation. 7 quiet days. 7 days where I kept replaying everything in my head. Dad's letter, the bank documents, Caroline's calm confession. Part of me wanted to pretend none of it was real. But the truth had already taken root. My father wasn't the man I thought he was. And my sister wasn't the victim I once believed. But the strangest part? Caroline seemed completely at peace. Almost relieved. Like she had finally finished a long, exhausting job. When I left her house that day, she walked me to the door. And before I stepped outside, she said something that stuck with me. "You should forget about this," she told me gently. "Dad's gone, the money's mine. There's nothing left to fix." At the time, I didn't respond, but something inside me felt unsettled. Because there was one detail in Dad's letter that wouldn't stop bothering me. One small sentence, one line that felt unfinished. He had written, "If anything happens to me before this is resolved, the rest is in the file." The file, not the safety deposit box, the file. And Caroline had never mentioned a file. 3 days later, I went back to Dad's house. Mom was staying with relatives, so the place was empty. Walking through the front door felt strange, like stepping into a life that no longer existed. The living room still smelled faintly like his coffee, his jacket still hung by the door. For a moment, I just stood there, remembering. Then I went to his office. Dad kept everything organized. Folders, cabinets, labels on everything. If there was a file, it had to be here. I started with the desk drawers. Bills, insurance papers, old tax returns, nothing unusual. Then I checked the filing cabinet. Property records, work contracts, family documents, still nothing. I was about to give up when I noticed something strange. One drawer didn't slide open all the way, like something was blocking it. I pulled harder. The drawer stopped halfway again, so I reached inside and felt something taped to the back panel, a small envelope. My pulse quickened as I pulled it out. Written on the front were 3 simple words. For Michael. My name. I opened it slowly. Inside was a USB drive and another letter. Dad's handwriting again. But this one was shorter and far more desperate. Michael, if you're reading this, then things didn't end the way I hoped. Caroline thinks she won. But she doesn't know everything. My heart started pounding. The money she took isn't clean. It's evidence. If she empties those accounts, it will trigger the investigation. My breath caught in my throat. Investigation? I kept reading. Federal auditors started looking into the company last year. I stalled them as long as I could. But the accounts are flagged. Anyone who touches them becomes part of the case. My hands went cold. Then the final line. The line that changed everything. If Caroline takes the money, she takes the fall. I sat there in Dad's office for a long time, just staring at the letter, trying to process what it meant. Caroline thought she had outplayed him. She thought the millions she collected were her reward. But Dad had set a trap that would only snap shut after he was gone. And she had walked straight into it. 2 days later, the trap closed. I was at home when the news alert appeared on my phone. Local business fraud investigation. Expands. I clicked it immediately. My stomach dropped as I read the article. Federal investigators had frozen several offshore accounts tied to embezzlement. Accounts recently accessed by a new name, Caroline Mitchell. Authorities believed she had moved large sums of suspicious funds within the last week. My chest tightened. Then my phone rang. Caroline. I hesitated before answering. Her voice was shaking. For the first time in my life, my sister sounded scared. Michael, she said quickly, you need to tell me what Dad left you. I said nothing. How do you know he left me something? I asked carefully. Silence. Then she whispered something that confirmed everything. They came to my house. My heart thumped. Who? Federal agents. Her voice cracked. They're saying the money is tied to fraud. I closed my eyes. The trap had sprung. Michael, she said desperately. You knew something. I looked down at Dad's letter on the table. The truth sat there in my hands. Heavy. Final. You blackmailed him for 3 years, I said quietly. That has nothing to do with this. Doesn't it? Her breathing grew sharp. He stole that money. And now you took it. Silence filled the line. Then her voice turned small. What do I do? For a moment, I thought about everything. The smile at the funeral, the years of secrets, the quiet war between father and daughter, and the strange justice of it all. Then I told her the only truth left. You deal with it. We didn't speak again after that. A month later, Caroline was formally charged. Fraud, money laundering, accessory to embezzlement. Her lawyers argued she didn't know the accounts were flagged, but the transfers, the withdrawals, the documents in the safety deposit box painted a different story. The same story she had used against Dad: control, greed, and leverage. Only this time, she wasn't the one holding the power. I still think about that day at the funeral. The quiet smile on her face, the look of someone who believed they had already won. But sometimes, the end of a story isn't the moment you think it is. Sometimes, the ending is written long before anyone sees it coming. And my father, for all his mistakes, made sure of one thing before he died. No one would walk away clean, not even the daughter who thought she had beaten him. And that was the moment I finally understood that smile. It wasn't happiness. It was the calm before everything fell apart. Caroline arrested, the money frozen, my father's secret finally exposed. Most people would have closed the chapter and moved on. But real life doesn't work that way. Because after Caroline was charged, something unexpected happened. Something that forced me to question everything I thought I understood about my father. And about my sister. About 2 weeks after her arrest, I received a call from a lawyer. Not Caroline's lawyer, my father's. A man named Mr. Halpern who had apparently handled Dad's legal affairs for years. His voice was calm, professional. "Michael," he said, "there are a few matters regarding your father's estate that need to be discussed." Estate. The word sounded strange. Dad had never been wealthy, at least not openly. "What kind of matters?" I asked. He paused. "The kind that are best discussed in person." We met the next morning in his office. The building was old, quiet, the kind of place where secrets probably lived for decades. Mr. Halpern placed a thick folder on the desk between us. "I assume you're aware of the investigation involving your sister." I nodded slowly. "Yes." He folded his hands. "Your father anticipated this outcome." That didn't surprise me anymore. Dad had clearly been planning something before he died. But the next sentence caught me off guard. He also left instructions for what should happen afterward. My stomach tightened. Instructions? Mr. Halpern slid a document across the desk. A sealed directive. To be opened only if Caroline accessed the accounts. I stared at it. My father's signature was at the bottom. "What does it say?" I asked. The lawyer studied me for a moment before answering. "Your father wanted you to decide her fate." The words hung in the air, heavy, confusing. "That doesn't make sense," I said slowly. Mr. Halpern opened the folder and revealed another document. A cooperation agreement, signed, prepared, waiting. "If this document is submitted to federal investigators," he explained, "it confirms that Caroline was acting under coercion." I frowned. "Coercion?" He nodded. "Your father prepared a statement claiming he forced her to move the money." I leaned back in my chair. "That's not true." "Correct," he said calmly. "But if the statement is delivered, the charges against her would likely collapse." My heart started beating faster. "You're saying I can get her out of this?" "Yes." He paused. "But only if you want to." Suddenly, the room felt very quiet. Dad had left the final decision to me. Justice. Or mercy. Caroline had blackmailed him for 3 years, taken millions, smiled while his coffin was lowered into the ground, and now, her future rested in my hands. Mr. Halpern spoke again. "Your father believed you would choose carefully." I let out a slow breath. Why would he do this? The lawyer's expression softened slightly, because despite everything, he still believed in family. That word stayed with me all day. Family. I drove home and sat in my car for nearly an hour thinking about Dad, about Caroline, about the broken pieces of our lives. Eventually, I did something I hadn't planned to do again. I visited Caroline. The jail visiting room was cold and bright. She looked different when she walked in. No expensive clothes, no confident posture, just tired and scared. When she saw me, her eyes filled with cautious hope. "Michael." Her voice was quiet. "You came," I nodded. Then I slid the cooperation agreement across the table. Her eyes widened as she read the first few lines. "Where did you get this?" "Dad left it." Her hands trembled. "This could clear me," she whispered. "Yes." She looked up at me. And for the first time since the funeral, there was no calculation in her eyes, just desperation. "Will you submit it?" The room fell silent. I studied her face, trying to see the sister I once knew. The girl who used to steal cookies with me from the kitchen. The girl who once defended me from bullies at school. But also the woman who had blackmailed our father, who had smiled at his funeral, and who had taken everything she could. Finally, I spoke. "You asked me once to forget about everything," I said quietly. She nodded slowly. "You said nothing was left to fix." Her eyes lowered. I continued. "But you were wrong." She looked up again. "So what happens now?" she asked. I picked up the agreement and folded it carefully. Then I gave her the answer she had been waiting for, the answer that would define the rest of both our lives. "Nothing," I said, and I walked out of the room. A year has passed since that day. Caroline eventually accepted a plea deal. 5 years. Reduced for cooperation with investigators. The stolen money was recovered. Most of it returned to the company Dad betrayed. The rest disappeared into legal fees and government seizures. In the end, no one kept the fortune. Not Dad, not Caroline, not me. And maybe that's the strangest kind of justice. Sometimes people ask me if I regret my decision, if I should have helped my sister, saved her, given her another chance. Maybe. But every time I remember that quiet smile at Dad's funeral, I also remember something else. Choices. Every single one of us made them. Dad chose greed, Caroline chose revenge, and I chose the truth. And sometimes, the truth is the only inheritance a family leaves behind.